Hello, I'm back. Today I'm going to tell you a story that's called Vilja. And Vilja was the main character in an operetta that was written by Ferenc Leha, who was Austro-Hungarian, and my mother knew every song in all of his works. And I, of course, heard this all the time. My mother had a beautiful voice. She would sing a lot. And just so that you know a little bit more about this composer, he is Austro-Hungarian, and I'm going to have to look this up. You know, I'm old. I don't remember everything. He was born in 1870, April the 30th, in Komárom, Hungary, and he died October 24th, 1948 in Bad Ischl, which is in Austria. His most famous operetta was The Merry Widow. And Vilja is one of the songs from this operetta, and I used to love this. My mother, I wish that you could have seen her. She was very petite with this tiny little waist, and she had black hair that I would almost call like purplish or bluish black. It was very intense, and she had these bright green eyes that she could look at me if I was across the room, if I had done something. Oh good God, it was just like arrows coming out, and I'd think, oh my God, I did something, I wonder what it was. But she was a very stunning person. Her skin was, my dad, when he finally was with us, used to always say that she looked like a China doll. She had very, very pale, almost translucent skin. And she was just gorgeous. Like I said, tiny waist, these big boobs that, you know, were all where they were supposed to be. And she had this intensity about her. If this woman entered the room, it's like almost like you could say, okay, what was that? There's some kind of energy. What is it? That's my mother. Anyway, she was just absolutely brilliant. So now that you know about Vilja, I was 5, and my mother had told me that I could go out and play on the beach by the river, which I did because that was one of my favorite places. And all of a sudden, oh, I couldn't believe it, just this little dog. It was a little black and white. And of course, I immediately had a thing going with this puppy. And of course, he didn't have a leash or a collar or anything. So when I left to go home, of course, I said, come here, little puppy, come here, little puppy. I later told my mother that he followed me, and my mother said, yeah, I know your idea of follow. You made him come with you. And I said, but Mama, he doesn't have any parents. He's all by himself. Can't I keep him? And she said, well, you know, we don't have enough to eat for us. And I said, but when I have something, I will give him some of my food. And she just looked at me and she said, you know, you're just like your father. You're just incorrigible. But he would do this. He would say, the dog followed me. Yeah, right. And she said, no, it's okay. You can keep the puppy. Have you gotten a name? I said, oh, yes, I'm going to call the puppy Vilja. And my mother immediately started singing. She went, Vilja, oh Vilja, and that's all I know. I don't know the rest. And she said, no, it's okay, you can keep it. But she said, you know what? I think that's a boy. And I said, well, but I would like this puppy to be called Vilja. And she said, it's your dog, you can do whatever you want. So I'm sitting there and I'm all happy. I thought, oh my God, this is great. I have a little puppy dog. And a friend of hers had given me this little ball of yarn, and I had a crochet hook. And I said, you know what, Mama, I'm going to crochet him a little collar and a leash. And she said, that's a really good idea. So I sat down on the ground. My puppy was in my lap. And here I am crocheting. And all of a sudden, I heard the squeaky gate. Because where we lived at that point was still the house that we had been given by the government. We didn't have our own place yet. And this very, very tall. Of course, when you're 5, everybody is tall. But to me, this guy was just huge. And he was a friend of my mother's. He did speak some German. His name was Tom. He was from Canada. He was one of the soldiers. And he's the one who had brought us that scratchy green blanket, and he would bring us leftover food or, something like that. One time he came with a big basket, and my mother just couldn't believe it. It had powdered milk in it and powdered eggs, and my mother almost squealed. She said, "It's got real coffee in it." And so it was always amazing when he would show up, because he would always bring us something. And my mother said, why don't you go play down by the river? Take your puppy. Obviously, they wanted to be alone. I didn't know what that meant. I was 5, for Christ's sake. And besides, I really liked this guy. I thought he was beautiful. He always picked me up, and he put me on his shoulders. And so I went down by the river, and I played. And then at one point, my mother came over, and she said, "Oh, you know what? You can come back. We're all going to have coffee." And Uncle Tom brought us a little bit of a cake. So we were sitting in that little cottage, and later, many years later, when my mother had finally come to the U.S. after my dad and my grandma died, I brought her. I came when I was 18, and then I was able to bring my mother when, 3 years later. I finally had the guts to ask her. I said, "So, Mama," I said, "Tell me, what was the deal with Tom?" And she said, "Well, it was in the war, and yeah, I had an affair with him, but he wanted me to marry him. He wanted me to come to," he lived in Canada, outside of Canada, and he was a real character because his name was Tom, but he used to say, "Tom, no, I don't look like a Tom, look at me." And my mother would say, "Yeah, that's right, you don't look like my name is Jacques." He was French Canadian, and he was you could tell he was just a very kind, very sweet person. And even though I was very tiny, I could tell that my mother was really, really fond of him. But when he came that last time that I saw him, he came to tell my mother that he was going back to Canada. And I said to my mom, I said, "So what was this conversation about when you told me to go play on the beach?" And she said he wanted me to follow him to Canada, but he didn't know that just the week before we had been told that your father was found and that he was in this army hospital. And so she said, until then, we assumed that your father had gotten killed. And so Jacques, Tom, wanted to make sure that she would go to Canada because he told her how much he loved her and how this was not an affair. He wanted her to go and to that country and marry him. And he said, "We'll have to figure out how this is going to work, I know, but I love you, little girl, I love you, and I don't want to be without you." So my mother said, "Well, I would normally do that because I am in love with you, but they just found my husband." Of course, I didn't find out until I asked her about it. And so I said, "How did you really feel about him?" And she said, "I've had 2 men in my life that I've loved. One was your father and one was Jacques." She said, "I was very, very much in love, but," she said, "I couldn't find it in my heart to leave your father. He could barely walk." She said, "Remember when he finally came home? He had gotten shot once in his leg and then in the arm, and I just couldn't do it." So, she stayed with my dad, which I can understand. I mean, they had history. She married my father when she was 18 and my dad was 21. So, and of course they had me. And she said that was sort of the determining factor because she figured that even if she would wait a couple of years and get a divorce, my father would have fought for me. And I know he would have, because it was really funny. When I was little, if I would do something that he didn't like, he'd say, hey, Aranka. My mother's name was Aranka. He would say, here, hey, talk to your daughter. And then when it was the reverse, my mother would say, hey, you want to talk to this daughter of yours? I was always somebody else's daughter, depending on how I behaved, which was, of course, absolutely hilarious. But I sort of I'm getting off the trail here. I did love that dog, and for some reason, I don't know why I make this association. I always thought part of Jacques was part with this dog. I don't know why, but I had this puppy for several years, and it was just some little, who knows, short-haired, black and white little thing, but it was a spectacular dog. I taught him to stand on his hind legs, and he would put his little feet up like this. I taught him to dance when he would go in a little circle. He would play dead. He would take food out of my mouth. I was just absolutely over the moon with this dog. And when I would get hurt or upset when I was little, and think about this for a minute, I was 5. I must have been a real character. Gee, maybe I still am. I don't know. You guys decide on that one. But I would take the dog and I would say, okay, if you don't love me and you don't want me here, that's okay. I'm going to take Vilja, and Vilja and I will go and work in the circus. We'll just do our little routine. I'm teaching Vilja all this good stuff. And at one point, I don't know where it came from, but it was like a little skirt that I couldn't fit into. Maybe it was one of mine. I don't remember. And so I would put it on Vilja, and then I took a stick and I would go alley-oop, and Vilja would stand up, and I'd say, okay, now we're dancing. And with this little skirt, I mean, I wish I had pictures of this. It must have been really precious. I loved that. I really, really loved that dog. And I guess that if he would, I don't know what happened to him. Where after we moved and we built a little house, one day he was just gone. So I don't know whether somebody took him or he ran away, or whether my parents just decided that, you know what, we don't have enough to eat. We really cannot feed a dog. So, but that was my first real pet, was Vilja. And I hope you like that story, and I will see you soon. Thank you very much.